Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
And I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. We are proudly brought to you in association with SA Partners, a world-leading business transformation consultancy. SA Partners are a truly purposeful company focused on helping organisations achieve sustainable improvement for themselves, others, and the planet. Welcome to episode 129 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Catherine Clark on the show with us today. Catherine is the CEO of Paralympics Australia. Catherine has held many senior roles in prominent sporting organisations. She is focused on creating performance cultures that drive improvement towards excellence. Catherine is also a speaker on this important topic of diversity and excellence within organisations. Let's get into the episode. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here, Brett.
Oh yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. But Catherine, what's your backstory? What has led you down this path to be the CEO of Paralympics Australia?
Yes, I often ask myself that, and anyone who looks at my LinkedIn goes, you studied law and criminology, and now you're in Paralympics Australia. I think, to be honest with you, I really identify with my career as an athlete. I loved sport from a young age. My parents didn't play or weren't involved, but sport is where I found my tribe. I found my sense of belonging and the things that are, authentic to me around continual improvement and striving to be the best that I can be. Sport was like this just rich canvas, whatever I played or whatever I was involved in. So my backstory, I guess, really, particularly what led me to here is being an athlete and then a coach and getting injured. So when you suffer, big adversity, I guess that's where you really get to know what you're made of, and moments that really focus you on what's important. And I think, I had a career-ending injury just before 2000 games and didn't go on that pathway to Sydney. And in fact, I left the country because I didn't want to be here. So I went over to play hockey professionally in Amsterdam. But I think more powerfully around leadership, on deep reflection over the years with leadership programs and working with my executive coaches, my goalkeeper in my hockey team, Amanda, was killed in my first year of law, actually the day before my first contracts exam. And the loss of Amanda was something when you're 18, you are immortal, you're bulletproof. And losing someone close to you through something that was hard to rationalise. She was taken. She was unfortunately lost to us in a domestic violence situation. And because I lost her in that way, I got really angry and I got really upset about it, and I really struggled. And then I had to do some work as to how to move forward with that. And losing her became my absolute rocket fuel for making every opportunity. I had to live for two people. That gave me the courage to take the contract to move overseas. I hadn't been out of Australia, even on a family holiday, and I moved all the way over to the other side of the world to coach hockey in a different language. And I was 20. It was pretty scary, wow. But it's like Amanda sits with you, and she's a really important inflection point in my backstory of, Catherine, you need to leap. Do not play it safe. Do not play in the margins. This is the stage. You don't know when that flame will go. So go live it. And I think from there, it's whether it's in leadership or every opportunity. Hence, I am probably a career counsellor's worst nightmare, is that an opportunity will come up. If I think I can sort of give it a crack, I'll have a jump. But it does mean that I've worked in government, I've done consulting, I've worked in manufacturing projects. I was the accidental CEO in terms of how I actually took up my first role. But I moved to New Zealand. I lived in the Netherlands. I actually lived in New Zealand for 10 years and back here. But I started my career studying law and criminology.
Wow. Catherine, that is a journey. That is a journey. But, we're here today to talk about diversity. But, with diversity too comes adversity. And you've definitely had some adversity through your time. And, thank you for sharing. And I can see how that can really, it's inspired you on, I guess, a lot of the people you work with, they've been through adversity and it's inspired them on. Like, it's amazing, isn't it? But so challenging, I guess, through that time.
Yeah. So, diversity is multifaceted, right? Because you even just think of that short backstory. When we talk about diversity, we talk about gender. I couldn't get a job in Australian sport. I had to leave the country and go to New Zealand as a rookie policy advisor. I left and got my first job over there about 23 years of age because I'd applied for so many in Australia. But women in paid leadership or even management roles at the time was a bit tricky.
Yeah.
So there's a gender lens. I went and lived in Holland in a different language with different cultural norms, with different practices. I still remember, and this is 1999, Brad, walking back from the supermarket on my first trip, and I had to carry my groceries in my shirt because they had got rid of plastic bags by 1999.
Yeah.
And we've only just done that recently in Australia.
Yeah.
By going and living, not traveling and having a holiday, but by living in a different country and immersing yourself, you realize how many different ways there are to do the everyday things, let alone how many diverse perspectives there are on really key things like our laws and the way that we, the societal norms that, guide, whichever community that you're living in. So I think being abroad, then moving to New Zealand and living in a truly bicultural country where, as a Pakeha, I was able to stand up and give my introduction and my mihi in Māori, made me incredibly conscious of what I didn't know about my own First Nations peoples back in Australia. So when I returned, that became a mission for me. So all these doors open that expose you, if you're willing and open, to unlearning what you thought was the only way to do things or the best way. And then suddenly all this new information comes in that, your brain widens and expands so much that it can never go back to the shape that it was in the first place.
Yeah, I love that unlearn, isn't it? Like, the paradigms that we've got and these new experiences can totally explode those paradigms. Catherine, who were some people through that journey and through your journey to this that have really inspired you, and what is it that drove that inspiration?
I think, to be really honest, the first person who showed me what leadership looked like was my mother. So Judy Clark. So I lived in a regional area at the time in Caboolture and was playing hockey for Queensland and had to come into Brisbane City 4 nights a week. So I'd get on the train at Caboolture, travel by myself as a young teenager, get off at Roma Street, go up to Kelvin Grove. My mum worked at QUT. She ran the professional experience unit, developing young educators and teachers of the future. And I think over the years of my high school, coming into her office and seeing how she worked with her people, her team, and how much they loved her, they would have walked over hot coals for her. But she didn't do it in a way where she was standing up and ordering people and directing them. My mother empowered people and she cared about them. And so subconsciously and completely without, me being aware, there was this amazing, striking woman in a leadership role, leading in an authentic way to her, but not in a way that would have been accepted in many other places, unless it was a seat of learning, obviously. And in an all-female leadership team, which it didn't even strike me. So for me, the unconscious bias was that, okay, well, women can do this, because I was seeing these examples right in front of me. So I'm incredibly grateful for that incidental coaching, I guess, mentoring of seeing my mother with her team and what they were doing for students and how much they cared about student success and whether the school was working out for them and whether they could get public transport to the school they'd been allocated and whether that was working for them, and how they would come together to collaborate to problem solve things. If one didn't know something, someone else in the team might. And there was Catherine playing with the stationery cupboard and doing her homework for high school, absorbing this sort of from the outside. So that my mum would be the first one, I think, in hindsight, that in no formal way, but I really look up to her, and I'm very, very grateful that I had that. But I've been really fortunate. I've had some amazing board members and board directors during my time. I've been really grateful for my time in New Zealand and doing my leadership apprenticeship in New Zealand. And I know this probably sounds funny because I am, proudly Australian, but being 20-something in New Zealand, my first CEO job was 28, totally really unprepared from a CV point of view. But being a female didn't matter. They had Helen Clark as the PM, multiple senior female ministers in cabinet. I was full of new ideas and energy, is what I'll say. And in New Zealand, there's a much more, I found, openness to change. Not so much a defensiveness of this is the way it's worked, we're awesome, but we are a small country with limited resources. It will be the power of our ideas and our ability to be adaptable that will lead to our success. And that's why they, despite, having the population of Queensland, they compete as a country on the international global stage, have brands like the All Blacks, because they are willing to unlearn and relearn, and keep the pace of change, because they want to be that change agent. I think they've been ahead of the game with the women's vote. There've been so many things. FPOS was trialled over there because I think there is that mindset of openness. So I was very fortunate that doors were closing for me in Australia, but I took the leap, never been to New Zealand, moved my life over to Wellington, and 10 years later I'd gone through that sort of the shaping, that early stage of my leadership. Many 360s that were, sometimes you take on all of that feedback and it's, confronting. I had to learn about pace. But in New Zealand, that was they really influenced, too many people to name here, really influenced my pathway. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, you're in a massive melting pot of achieving great things through that era, weren't you? And ongoing. Like, you look at what New Zealand's done always, but especially since the late 90s through, for a country of what now, high 4 millions, maybe 5 million people.
Yep.
And I was thinking just last year, like, there was hardly a world title that they're involved in that they didn't hold, this time last year, and they still hold an awful lot of it. It's crazy.
That's right. It shows the power of mindset. And I think it shows the power. I mean, one of the things I have mentored a lot of young women, and I formed a youth advisory group when I was at netball, because I want them, like, you do not let the doubters, you do not let the haters, you do not let your own imposter syndrome, whatever is your thing, acknowledge that voice. Don't listen to it. And I think what Kiwis do really well, yes, they're small. And as they would say to you, and we're at the arse end of the world. They're across the ditch from, Big Brother, who's mean to them sometimes. But there is this intense sort of anticipation of greatness, which means you believe in the dream, and that's that mindset that takes you to greatness. And at the end of the day, we're all humans. We've got different training environments. If you make the most of what you've got wherever you are, you'll find success in whatever it is.
Yeah, that's neat. And Catherine, we're talking about New Zealand, where they've embraced diversity earlier, and even back before that, you're talking about, in Scandinavian countries. And now you're part of Paralympics Australia, which is massive on diversity, and what's happened there has been so amazing, and credit to you. But Catherine, why is diversity a key element in achieving excellence? What would you say to leaders out there in organizations?
The first thing for me is it makes you connect with your own humanity, because ultimately we're all about belonging. Everyone is striving, whatever onion layers are across the top of that, and we do put a few on, ultimately it is about connection and engagement. So we're going to get a lot out of making genuine connections with anyone we meet. And everyone has something to teach you. The guy sitting on the train with me just before had something to tell me about his views of infrastructure in Queensland sport. You're going to learn something for every conversation. I think by making sure and being more intentional as a leader of surrounding yourself with diverse views, opinions, you're going to get better decisions. You're going to understand the risks in a 360 view, because someone else will see the world or know something that you don't. You're going to build an environment where it's safe to have different views. You're going to make yourself more resilient against confirmation bias or recency bias, because you have diversity of age, gender, culture, race, ethnicity. When it comes to us, whether it's able-bodied, people with a disability, whatever that diversity profile looks like, it can also be as simple as finding someone every week and having a conversation with them who is going to disagree with you. Because if you've got a great idea, there's so much power in going to someone who is honest and truthful enough to tell you why it's going to fail. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but it means you're going to know what the risks are and how it might be seen by people who might criticize it, or who would be against the change that you're putting up. So I think diversity from a outcome, result perspective benefits. Diversity for me makes us more complete as humans, because we also engage and connect, and that belonging thread, is absolutely critical.
Yeah, Kathy, as you're saying that, you're talking about that belonging thread and the real purpose to it, that it drives that connection, allows for better decisions, reduction in risk. There's the different views and that learning and avoiding bias. I think back to that comment you made about New Zealand, how they're willing to unlearn and relearn and have a crack and go. It sounds to me a lot like that, because I guess the alternative of this is the opposite, is being around people who are exactly the same as you and living in a life of habit and going a common path. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think diversity in a way is kind of what I've done. I heard recently someone describe me as an infinite learner. I don't know whether that's actually a thing or not, or whether it's just I annoy the crap out of them because I just am relentless at reading books, and I read all kinds of things. So from whether I talk about environment, particularly biology, I'm fascinated by, through to your normal, more traditional business books, poetry, love poetry. So you can have a more well-rounded perspective on the world that we live in and how we take up our role if we are open. And I think that infinite learner tag for me is, I think I've just always been curious. I come from a family of teachers. Maybe that's got something to do with it. I don't know. But is to question, well, why does it work like that? And as an athlete, you go, I've got a sore lower back, and it turns out that it's something to do with your big toe. And then you're like, okay, so how does that work? And then you understand that, the way that you're walking and the shoes that you've got are actually the real cause of what's going on your back, not something that you lifted the other day. And I think if you've got that curious mindset, which I had, you take those leaps into other countries, you immerse yourself into another culture or another language, and you find out things that you didn't even know were things that then broaden your perspective, and they offer you some solutions. And for me, I guess I found a sense of real connection in New Zealand. I felt like I'd been there in another life. It was more of me than I knew, because there was a different way of leading that didn't require you to have all the answers and stand out the front. I mean, I'm an introvert. I've had to really learn to coach and process about getting up in front of people and, large public crowds and making speeches and all of that kind of stuff. But it wasn't something that came particularly natural to me. But when you connect to your purpose and who you are, and you find your own way of leading, to me, diversity helps you discover who you are, not what society has told you should be. There's no one way of leading. But if you only ever, to your point, if you limit that and your scope of experience, becomes more limited, you may be missing out on all these other things that help you discover more of yourself and the talents, but also where you feel, oh, geez, this feels right. This is how I want to show up in the world.
Yeah, that's
what I found by going to different countries and meeting so many different people. And Paralympics, I'm doing the same in this environment with this community right now.
Yeah, that's neat. That's awesome. Go to enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get a hold of a persona and employee journey map that you can use to help enhance your employees' journeys, considering greater diversity in the future. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to help others gain insights and create a better future. Let's get back to the episode. Yeah, though I can see that, in the world that we're in now, where there's so much volatility and so much change, that learning and is at the heart of it. But it sounds like from the conversation, there's so much upside in diversity. There's the pieces we're talking about where people are going to challenge you, and there's going to be different views and different outlooks. And there's also potentially a big purpose bit to it. But what do you believe, stops leaders or cultures where people actually want to be challenged and want to have different views put across and they can handle it? Because it seems to me that there's a lot of organizational cultures that I come across where people actually avoid that sort of conflict and they don't want it, and it's seen as a awkward, terrible thing. What's your thoughts on that?
This is something I ponder a lot. And I think I'll offer a couple of different thoughts on it. I don't profess to have the answers, but I have been thinking about this. The first thing I'd say is that from when we are young, we are rewarded for being right. So I look at my children. I have two little boys, 6 and 9. I look at them going through school, and how much is hinging on whether they are right on a test or right on this. So really, from a very young age, you know, cultures and behaviors, cultures in organizations, from a leadership point, what you reward, what you celebrate, becomes your culture by act or omission. So becoming intentional about that, making sure that we are rewarding exploration, that we are rewarding creative lateral thinking. And that, as a leader, one of my journeys was that to let go. As an athlete, you try to make sure that you're doing everything that you can do to get selected. But at the end of the day, the coach selects the team. You can do as much as you want to. You could get injured in the meantime. But the biggest lesson is that by playing for the girl next to you, you'll become the best player on the pitch. You play for someone else. It's not just about, yourself. And I think right and wrong is not just about self. Right could be about, have you talked to everyone else in your team and worked out what's right for them? We are finding this come through now in sport, where we've got First Nations athletes as part of a team who have different experiences and different ways, different lenses about various decisions that may be made, by the company that you're in or by the sporting team that you're in. So playing for your colleague, whatever it might be in whatever context, you're playing for the hockey player next to me made me a better captain, because it's not about me. As a leader, I would define my job as making other people successful. That is my job. And it was no different. I was captaining a hockey team. My coach said to me, I was having a shocking game, make the player next to you the best player on the field. Oh my gosh, the second half could not have been more different to the first half. But that ability to look out is an intentional shift, Brad. And I think sometimes people, we want confirmation because it makes us feel right. We get encouraged, we've been rewarded. So when we start challenging reward structures and cultures in our businesses that reward different things, it won't be about being right. It might be about asking better questions. It might be about failing fast by trying something really bold, but having the courage and the bravery and the pragmatism to know when it's not going to work and pull it so that you can go and do something else. So I think that would be my first thing about why. The other thing would be simply that we are threatened sometimes by people questioning whether our experience or what we know, that there could be a different way.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, that's kind of like, that will be the next way. The thing of my idea colliding with Brad's idea, we find a third space. And if we use that model, it allows us also to think about how to resolve conflict. We get out of our foxholes rather than defending a position, intentionally stay open, and then Brad and Catherine's idea collide, and we suddenly have this amazing third solution, which is even better than the first A and B. However, that can mean we're uncomfortable, and the brain is primarily wired to efficiency and survival. And I think as soon as we get that amygdala hijack, then really our brain chemistry sort of takes over and we go into defense mode. And it is, I can honestly say that the last 10 years have been becoming really aware of when you want to take up a position and just staying quiet. 2 ears, one mouth, shut up, listen, and then let the silence sometimes hang. Let the person who may be hanging back with a diverse view, who has been worried about sharing that view, hold the space open for as many different views. Encourage the contrarian thinker. Make sure every meeting there is someone who is willing to say, well, why could this fail? Why is there another way? Have we talked to all the stakeholders who may be impacted by this? And rather than seeing them as an adversary, see them as an instrumental part of making it successful, because you'll get a different lens on it. But that takes courage.
Yeah, I can imagine. I love that. In your response there, I hear, you need that humility and even a bit of vulnerability, but then it comes back to seeing diversity and different ideas as enhancing a paradigm or an existing view. Like, it's at the heart of continuous improvement, which a lot of the community and people that listen to this podcast, it's all about, how do we help create cultures of continuous improvement and innovation? there's a big part of it is
Yes.
that diversity and embracing those different views. Like you said, A plus B then can get you that step forward.
Mm. C, D, E, F, G.
Yeah.
Once you got a roll, But I think, do you think that people are moving past in Australia, the archetype, which, I came through sort of the 90s in my high school and then into uni, was very much the leader had the answers and the leader was the go forth and conquer. Do you think there's been a shift with leaders seeing their role more about empowering others to shine, and that our role in New Zealand, there's a saying called rangatira, and it is literally translation is the weaving of people. And so when I came through, leadership for me, my journey was about weaving people. So the synergies with being a captain in a hockey team where you don't win the game on your own. If you've got, 11 players on the field and they are shining in that moment will be yours. But business and politics and that has been slower to sort of adapt to or adopt a different way. Do you think it's shifted?
It depends on the organization. So I have a thing I call expertitis, Catherine. So that's where the experts get promoted up and they're the expert. And so their natural behavior is to command and control. And then everyone goes, oh, it's that top down that creates that top down culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another shift in some companies happening at the minute, which a lot of what I'm involved in, the community's involved in, is how do we get bottom up? So, you win or lose the game on the field, so it's your frontline employees that are making or breaking it. But you often, as we know, you lose the game before the game with your culture and what's going on in the team, don't you? And there's some companies out there at the moment that are doing massive shifts to get that absolute respect for the front line, the people who know where the problems are, who actually probably best know how to fix it, who know how to innovate because they're in it every day. And there's a lot of companies trying to shift to that, because with that comes agility. You've all of a sudden got 80,000 problem solvers and innovators, rather than when you go the other way with expertitis, you get like a few leaders and they get overburdened.
Yep.
And so I see a mixed bag.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, particularly working with our young people, that will be a leader's success. It'll be those who can not feel like they need to be in control, but who can help navigate and shape. Diversity can be hard, right? Anyone who's doing it for real knows it can be hard, because we also have to get used to it as people, of coming together as a diverse leadership team and working it out, sitting in the discomfort, sitting when we're arguing about something and not leaving, but creating space and time for that brilliant idea to forge, right? The diamond takes a while to sort of come out, but I'm hopeful, because I think the young people of today will demand a seat at the table and they want their voice to be heard. So if we want retention and we want workforces, that are able to bring full self to the table and all those ideas, we're going to need to respond to that with different leadership.
Yeah. And they're so driven, this generation, by bigger things. Like, I don't know about you, Catherine, but when I left school, it was all about, right, got to get a house, got to get a job, got to do this. Whereas this generation, it's like, no, how are we going to impact the world? Like, okay, we've got to do something for the elderly. Okay, we've got to do something for, the planet. Okay, no, I'm really keen to go do something for, all sorts of avenues, like yourself with, working with Paralympics Australia, which is amazing. So it's a really amazing generation, isn't it?
It's palpable, that sense that you described. I feel it when I did a presentation for UQ. I presented, it's my 4th year actually going back and presenting to their young changemakers. So 200 year 11s, Brad.
Nice.
And I've met them every year. So I can see even changes from year to year. And so they ask the most amazing questions, and nothing, there's no sort of political correctness about it. They want to know where you stand on path to treaty. They want to know where you stand on climate change. And Catherine, can you promise us that, Brisbane 2032 is going to be carbon positive? It's going to be, climate positive, and carbon neutral. And it's fantastic that we're having these conversations, whether it's transgender, climate, First Nations, gender politics will come up because of my role. I've done a lot of work outside of netball, but, that's where I started my sort of career, and I'm very passionate about, ending domestic violence. Yes. These are matters that are front of mind. They're not somewhere down the packing order. There's a very closer connection to purpose and a global mindset.
Yeah, Catherine, here. Emily, my wife, and I, we work for years with Friends with Dignity, and there's so many elements that need to play out here, and that's a massive space. Catherine, with with leadership and organizations, I guess you and I see that the talent of the future is going to be working for these diverse, purposeful organizations. Like I see the movement to it massively, just like you are. But what advice would you give to a senior leader? What would be your enterprise excellence 2-minute tip to them to say, here's where to start and really start to move forward and increase your diversity and increase the way that we engage to respect different views and to have those robust conversations?
I think the first thing for me would be have conversations with people you don't know or that you don't regularly work with, or in your community, depending on how brave you are. To me, that's the first easiest step, because if you're not doing that, then the chances are those skills of creating space and safety for people to come through to have those conversations, the real ones. Usually the real conversations are the ones people worry about having, that they need to have. And to me, that serves a whole range of things, from building our ability to resolve conflict, communication, better decision-making, but certainly from a leader's point of view. How many conversations a week are you having with people who have a divergent view? How many new people, or people where you've diverged on a decision that has been made, or they work in an area that you might see as a competitor to you? See them as a worthy rival, not a competitor. Not as a nil-sum game. It's kind of like, let's lean in and see what we can learn from each other, because ultimately that's where we will resolve these big, wicked problems that we have in the world, is by getting together and solving them together and being willing to listen. And sometimes that openness of mind, I think if we get used to it, it's like any muscle in our body. The more we do that, we're going to get stronger at it. We're going to feel more confident. And then if leaders are modeling it, it will happen. And you'll become more intentional in meetings without even practicing or rehearsing it in your agenda. The dialogue and the debate will happen, because, if it's not right at the top, it's unwinnable down below, I would say. So it has to be modeled by your executives.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Catherine. A lot of the people listening, they'll be involved in a thing called leading from the front, coaching leaders to walk the front line, and engage and understand. And I think your response there, I think everyone should add that to those, improvements they're looking at. How do we get more of that going? That's amazing.
And I would really invite anyone, people with a disability, feel often like they are the people that leaders don't want to stop and talk to, because they're not sure what language to use, or they're not sure about, do I kneel down or bend down when someone's in a wheelchair? Just be you. The most powerful thing you can do for someone living with disability is not walk past, is to stop and have the conversation as you would with any other one of your employees. Because the more we know and educate ourselves, we reduce conscious or totally unconscious bias. So that's a personal one from me on behalf of our community. I think that I've heard many times over the past 12 months while I've been onboarding.
Yeah, that's awesome. Be curious, be yourself, have the conversations. That's awesome. Catherine, what's been, we've spoken this episode a lot about learning and I guess breaking our paradigms through engaging in diversity and embracing diversity and diverse views. What's been a recent insight for you, a recent learning you've had?
Oh my gosh, you're asking me to pick a recent one. I've been drinking from the fire hydrant, Brad,
I could imagine.
Insights of diversity. Front and center today being the day it is, but has resonated throughout the year in continual iterative, almost shock and learning, is about the lack of accessibility of our communities. Able, ambulant, bodied people, we go about our day. We don't really give thought to things that are annoying us, like, oh, geez, the Wi-Fi signal is really slow today. Meanwhile, I am now in a community where I am regularly with and going to meetings or going to sporting centres where the people that I'm with won't be able to get into the building. We've got athletes who've been invited to speak for companies who haven't thought about the fact that my athlete is in a wheelchair and won't be able to go up the stairs. That we've got booked a restaurant where I need to make sure one bad incident, they said it was accessible, but that meant my athlete had to go around the back through the back door through the kitchen and into the restaurant, but that was deemed to be an accessible restaurant.
Wow.
For me, when I had a baby and I had prams, I realized the lack of space in some places and how great it was to have ramps. When I have been with my grandparents, my granny turned 100 last year,
Wow.
and I've been involved in looking after my grandfather beforehand. And you realize that when you have people in wheelchairs or you have people with mobility issues, how important it is for families. 40% of Australian families live with disability. A lot of those families have mobility challenges that might require, accessibility to be the norm. So for me, realizing how many of our train stations, issues with buses, but also trying to get to work where the doors are so heavy, people can't open them. It doesn't just affect Paralympians, people with disability, older adults, people with prams. This is something that I've become so conscious of now. Every time I see steps, I'm looking for, where's the ramp? How can someone get in here? So that's become something now that I'm alerted to. I'll never unsee it. And the way that creates barriers that for most of us, we are completely unaware of. There is no malice or poor intention. But for me, this is the opportunity that Brisbane 32 presents, is that Brisbane will deliver the most inclusive games the world has ever seen. And I, in a short way, I call it winning big. We'll win on the podium, and we will win in accessibility, in education and health, because we'll truly remove those barriers that once you see them, you can't unsee them.
Yeah, too true. That's such a great insight. And I know myself, I'll be looking around this afternoon. I'm sure there's many I've missed. So, it's big. Just your piece on the pram, like that hits home, because just how tight it is to try get through. But then you think if you're in a wheelchair and it's even wider, like it's impossible. Yeah.
And you see now with some of the legacy of the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast, the venues that are really accessible have experienced far more utilisation and patron spend because people can be there.
Yeah.
More people can be there. A diverse range of patrons can be there, and they want to stay there because it's accessible for them. They can meet, each other. Mums groups can meet, and they can do baby programs. And this is good for us. Universal design is good for all businesses. We're fighting for talent for employees. We want volunteers in sport. This is a win-win.
Yeah.
We've just got to move, in terms of how we design our spaces and being more thoughtful. We have some people who, yes, we've got elevators in the building, but when they go to the kitchen, the person in the wheelchair can't reach anything because, we just need to think through the employee experience. But you can look at that. I just went through that on my journey through sport with being a woman in sport, in leadership. There was some times where it wasn't very inclusive, and there are times where I wish people had a thought of, is this conversation or what's being talked about right now very appropriate for who's, around? I personally think they shouldn't be having it anyway. But I think once we are mindful, this is a win-win. Our organisations, our communities, our companies are going to be all the better for it.
Yeah, and it sounds to me it starts with awareness, which, Catherine, I really appreciate you coming on the show and the knowledge you've shared to build our awareness. I know I've had countless insights through this conversation. I thank you for it. So, Catherine, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming and sharing knowledge to help us create a better future. How can people reach out, get involved, and help with the journey of Paralympics Australia through to Brisbane 2032 and ongoing?
Well, we always want, absolutely, 2032 and beyond. We have our Oz Squad membership that people can just, if you Google us, you can find us on any platform. Paralympics Australia, the Oz Squad, the Australian Paralympic team. If you Google us, you'll find us everywhere. But you can join our newsletter and follow all the amazing stories of our incredible athletes and their families and the people around. The Australian Paralympic team and the wider community is called the Mob, because we are somewhere that you find your belonging, that diversity and inclusion is celebrated. So, this is an open invitation for all your listeners, Brad, to come on board the Brisbane 2032 bus.
Thanks so much, Catherine. It's going to be exciting. And I know that, boy, the work that goes in, but I know there'll be amazing outcomes too through that. So thank you. Thank you for everything you have done, Catherine, and everything you will do with your mob. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brad.
Cheers. What a great episode. Remember, you can visit our website, enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get hold of a persona and employee journey map you can use to plan and enhance employee journeys into the future, considering greater diversity. Please like, subscribe and share this podcast to help others gain insight and create a better future. There were 2 key takeaways for me from this podcast. Of course, first of all, the power of diversity. With diversity comes greatness, different thoughts, different lives, different backgrounds, different experiences. Bringing more diverse people into our workplace, I've seen it, many organisations, create dramatic, better results for the future. The second key takeaway for me was enabling the workplace for everyone. When you look at your workplace and you consider diversity, there may be improvements everywhere to help it be more inclusive and more welcoming for people with different diverse backgrounds and different requirements. Thanks again, Kathy. What an amazing episode. Thanks for sharing your backstory, your knowledge, and helping us create a better future. Bye for now.